In today's show, I'm looking at players who might be buy low options for fantasy basketball leagues. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today, we're going to be talking about buy low trade options, guys whose value might be depressed for whatever reason that is, and you might be able to acquire them at a cheaper price. It doesn't mean go and get them at all costs. It means get them at a cheaper price. Now, before I do that, though, there is something I wanted to mention that's come to my attention, and it's, I don't know what it is, really, and it's just, I guess, the realization that I've had, and it's something that I think can benefit people who listen and watch this show, is that I do a lot of content, obviously, right? There's, during the week, there's 4 videos a day, there's 2 a day over the weekend, there's so much stuff coming out. I tweet, I have Instagram, there's Discord, there's stuff all over the place, and not everybody can keep up with everything that I say. Right, that's impossible. And what I say is not 100% correct. It's what I believe 100% at the time, and trying to use available information that's out there to provide that information or my thoughts, and try and distinguish what's thoughts and what's speculation and what's fact and all that sort of stuff. Right? I think most people get that. But something was brought to my attention that the people who follow or watch or listen, they don't necessarily get everything that I say the way it's intended, or they don't hear everything I said. Yesterday, I put a tweet out saying, imagine how the Warriors would be, or something along the lines of, if LaMelo Ball was on the Warriors, he'd clearly be their third best player, right? Clearly. And someone said, oh, well, that's just hindsight. No way that was what you were suggesting, that Wiseman was such a better fit for them. And I said, look, I did 8 mock drafts and had LaMelo Ball at number 1, clearly at number 1, in every one of those mock drafts. It's not hindsight. And it just really, but everyone thought Edwards was number 1 and Wiseman should be number 2, and that was the perfect fit. So what you're saying is based on 2 weeks of action, and no one would have thought that back in the day. And it just, again, shows that people might take snapshots of what you think or what you say, or miss things that you've said ad nauseum through literally 8 separate mock drafts, I think it was, where I had LaMelo as the clear number 1, and I said any team that, wherever he falls, you just take him. But that idea, so just when you do hear me say something, and I say a lot of things, just realize that a lot of time there might be context behind it, that you may have missed an episode, you may have missed something that I said there, and that it's not always just as cut and dry as that, or your assumption is not always accurate. And I've got to do a better job of that as well. I'm not assuming something that someone says is the whole story. But I think that just really brought it home to me that I don't think I could have been any clearer about my thoughts on LaMelo Ball heading into the draft. But even he has exceeded my expectations by 200% at least, significantly better than I anticipated. But I could not have been any clearer, yet still, that idea that I'm reacting to 2 weeks worth of basketball and there's no way that that's what I thought before the draft is pervasive. And I think that can be quite instructive just as to how people work in terms of analyzing information, which brings us in to talking about buy low trades. Sorry for that little preamble, but let's look at some category league buy lows. And the first bloke that's there, a lot of you will say, Jrue Holiday, Josh, he's 1 game back from COVID. He's the 369th player in the last week because he only played 18 minutes. But I'll tell you why he's here. Now, most of the stuff, vast majority of times when I do this, it's based on chatter that I hear. It's based on production, but it's based on chatter that I hear. And as soon as this game went down, should I be worried about Jrue? Do I need to trade Jrue away? Pair that with a question or multiple questions that I got in the mailbag. Hey guys, people won't trade for players who got COVID because they think that they have permanently decreased lung capacity and they'll never get back to their best. Now, that might be true. COVID has plenty of issues that we don't fully understand, and there are players who struggle with it, and there are people who struggle with it. There are lots of long-term effects. But my point here with Jrue is that if you're panicking after the fact that he came off the bench for one game and played 18 minutes, and you're panicking about, Jason Tatum struggled coming back, and we know that it's going to impact their lungs, and they're talking about not being able to breathe and all that sort of stuff, which, again, is fair enough. That means that there is a massive buy low window here on Jrue Holiday, because people will have this idea. Ignoring the fact that Kevin Durant had COVID, I think he's going all right. Karl Anthony Towns had COVID, and for him saying that it impacted him and it was pretty bad, he's still playing pretty well. Jason Tatum had COVID, he struggled, and then he went absolutely bananas in that game against the Wizards. It's not an absolute death knell for your fantasy production, as some people may make it out to be. Didn't James Harden have COVID? I think he's going all right. So using that and that one game back, which people are panicking about, it is an opportunity to try and get Jrue. Now, he's the 31st ranked player this season. I think a 35 to 45, 50 range is a realistic expectation. So any guy outside the top 50 that you can trade for Jrue Holiday, and the window's small, it's not a large window, that's what you should be trying to do. I hope that makes sense. Andrew Wiggins, Wiggo. He is struggling at the moment. Started off really well, blocking shots at a career high level. Now, unfortunately, those numbers have just evaporated. And he also can't shoot anymore. 29% from three over the last month. That brings his season-long number down to 35%. Now, I'm not suggesting that Andrew Wiggins is a top 70 player or a top 80 player or maybe even a top 100 player. But if you can get him for your worst player, the rubber band theory, which I don't even know if I'm using that term correctly, but the rubber band theory of how his shooting percentage is going to fare from here on out, it's going to get better. Over the last 4 games, he's shooting 17% from three. It almost literally can't get worse. It probably could get worse, but it probably won't. Most likely won't. So it's going to bounce back. And then therefore, he's probably going to have a stretch. 5 games, 7 games, where he shoots 40% from three. And maybe the blocks come back up, although I'm not certain about that because they were way above career numbers. Although, the last 4 games he's had 2 blocks and he's averaging 1.1 over the course of the year. So there is some big room for improvement here for Wiggo, even though he's barely been a rosterable player over the last month. I think we need to look at some of that ability. Now, the free throw shooting, just write it off. It's not happening. He's shithouse now for some reason at the line, despite being a high 70s guy when he entered the league. But the field goal percentage, the 3-point shooting, that stuff is going to come back. If you want to talk about poor shooting, Darius Garland. 40 minutes a night is sexy. But in those last 3 games, his true shooting's 43%. 35 from the field, and an inexplicable 64% from the line. He's hitting 30% from three, which is all right. Can't hit twos, can't hit free throws. And over the last 2 weeks, he's at 37% from the field. This dude, his true shooting this year is 52. He's hitting 83% of his free throws, so there's obviously room for that to improve. He's hitting 38% of his threes. There's obviously room for that to improve. And he's hitting 46% of his twos, so there's obviously room for that to improve. The minutes are fine. The assists are strong. He's bumping his steals up somewhat. There is some value here in buying low because, again, the sentiment exists. If I look at a comment over on Basketball Monster, from about 6 days ago, atrocious efficiency. And it is correct. He has atrocious efficiency over this last period of time. That doesn't mean it's going to persist. He was a very good free throw shooter last year, 88%. He was a good free throw shooter in college. There is a chance that he can become, once again, a good free throw shooter. And he is 83% on the season, so there is room for that to improve. Ja Morant's on my buy lows. I've been mentioning this for a while. Now, I thought it was crazy that his ADP was in the 20s. I think I said he may struggle to be a top 40 player. Of course, people thought that I was stupid when I said that. Ja is the 94th ranked player this year. The ankle injury has definitely had an impact on him. But the thing that holds true about Morant is the lack of steals, and more importantly, the lack of threes is going to hold him back. Now, the steals are actually improving, 1.3 over the last 2 weeks. But that legendary type efficiency he had last year, true shooting 56%, has gone. 46% true shooting over the last week, 41% from the field, 60% from the line, 20% from three. Not only does he not hit threes, he doesn't take them. The minutes are low, 31 minutes a night. He hasn't blocked a shot in over 2 weeks. and the usage is low. I would not be valuing Ja Morant as a top 30 player, a top 40 player, or even a top 50 player. To be honest, I wouldn't even trade a top 60 player for him at this stage. I think he's a 70-ish type ranked player, and even that might be generous. It's a hard buy low to pull off.
Giggity.
Just because of name brand value. There are people who legitimately still would take Ja Morant over Zion Williamson in the NBA draft, and I cannot get behind that. I can't. So there are people who love Ja, and there are people who think that he is going to be much better than what he currently is, and he will be in the future. I have no doubt about that. But for this year, you're valuing him as anything more than a top 80 player at best. I think is a poor decision. So find the guys who love Ja, find the Grizzlies fans, and see if you can extract a top 60 player back. It might be tough, but you've got to sell on upside. You've got to sell on those first two games where he had 44-9 and 28-7. You've got to sell on those games. He was hitting threes, he was getting steals, and he's not anymore. And the last guy.
But what about scarves?
OG.
Balenciaga
Stop,
ones.
OG. You better stop, OG.
What about scarves indeed? Again, I try and use so many different things when talking about this, when talking about buy lows. What do their projections look like? What do their current ranks look like? What do their short-term ranks look like? What the hell are people saying? And multiple people, Josh, can I move on from OG Anunoby? The answer to that is, kids, cover your ears, do whatever the fuck you want. Like, I don't care. If you want to move on from him, do it. In a million years, I wouldn't. But if you want to move on from him, do it. And that's because they're overreacting to him returning from the calf injury where he's the 133rd ranked player. And he's playing 29 minutes a night. Now, 133rd is not even that bad. Over the last week, he's 116th. Why? Well, this dude was basically leading the league in steals. And since he returned, he's had 2 steals in 6 games. There's your answer. Like, that's your answer. He's not going to be a 17-point per game scorer. He can probably afford to hit a few more threes, hitting 26% since he returned. But he hasn't had steals. Instead of 2 steals over 6 games, we should realistically be expecting 11 steals, 10 steals. And that changes him from a 133rd ranked player to like a 70th ranked player. If you can get OG Anunoby in a deal for a top 90 player, you win easily. Easily. Don't be fooled by this recent dip in steal production. It will come back. He's not going to be a big scorer. He can improve his threes, and he definitely is going to improve those steal numbers. Let's talk points leagues. I'm going to put in there as well, Jrue Holiday. Again, for everything that I mentioned earlier, if you are just tuning into the points league section of this show, just go back to the start of the category league section and just listen to what I said about Jrue Holiday. Let's talk about some other blokes. I've got on this list Tyler Herro.
Everyone has a hero.
True.
0 people shouldn't have a hero.
Yeah.
It is true. Over the last week, Herro is averaging 21 points, and that's one game. But I think we have to look at people, again with this one, it's not just about that one game performance from Herro. This is a guy that's averaging 30 fantasy points per game this season. But it's about the people who are going to look into it and go, well, Kendrick Nunn's playing well. Herro is coming off the bench now. What does his long-term outlook look like? Is he going to be reduced in value? They can use the same argument that I use against Kendrick Nunn in that there's only been 9 games this year where Dragic, Butler, Herro, and Adebayo have played together, meaning, well, we don't know what Herro's role is going to be on a fully healthy squad. There are people who will tell you that Nunn is better than Tyler Herro. And they're the people that if they somehow have Herro, that's the sort of people you need to target for a trade. So that one game in his return, it was okay. 21 fantasy points isn't great, but he's a guy that you look at as a 28, 29, 30 fantasy point producer. So get the uncertainty. Try and talk up the Kendrick Nunn scenario. Try and see where he fits there. It's a crowded backcourt. Avery Bradley's still got a return. Goran Dragic is going to start over Herro now. He's been benched. I just like Herro. I like his snarl. I like his swagger. I like Logan Paul. Nobody likes Logan Paul. But whatever it is, try see if you can get him because I think there is a bit of a market inefficiency there. Terry Rozier. He was on the Sal High podcast a while ago because what he was doing was insane. And now what he's doing is shithouse. Simple. The last 4 games, he's averaging 22 fantasy points per game. For the season, he's averaging 33. The real Terry Rozier probably sits somewhere in the middle, around a 30-point player, but he is way off. Now, I was down on Terry Rozier heading into this season, hated the contract the Hornets gave him last year, but he proved me wrong to begin this season, playing exclusively as a shooting guard, and his efficiency went through the roof. And as soon as I turned that corner and said, you know what, maybe he just is this good of a shooter, he's been dreadful. Do I expect him to get better than what he is currently, or what he is over the last week? A little bit. But now I'm also getting the doubt back in my head going, well, maybe I was right. Maybe I was right and the 25 games to begin this season was the mirage, which is definitely a possibility. So don't view Rozier as a top 50 player in points leagues. In fact, he's only 63rd this year, averaging those 33 fantasy points. Try and get him for a top 90 player, a top 80 player, use his past record, use his shooting from last season. Again, do what I just did then. 70 games versus 20 games. 300 games in Rozier's career, whatever it is, versus 20 games. Now, I just want to take a flyer on the guy. I really need a shooting guard. However you want to do it. But have a look at Rozier here. And what he's currently doing is below expectations, but what he was doing earlier was above expectations. Malcolm Brogdon. Last two games, only 29 fantasy points. And while that's 2 games, obviously, the reason I want to look at him as a buy low is his knee. He missed the last game against the Knicks with this knee issue. He is questionable for Monday's game, and by the time you listen to this, we may know whether he's playing or not. There's a chance he sits out all games up until the All-Star break. This is what happens at this time of the year. There's only 2 more games. If we give him these 2 games off, then we get an extra 5 days break through the All-Star break, and it lets him fully heal. So his value is going to drop, and people are going to panic about it. Oh, it's a knee. Or why is he taking off 4 games in a row here? Brogdon's the 38th ranked player this year, but I reckon you could throw a top 70 player for a guy that's last couple of games have been below par, for a guy that's currently hurt and questionable. I think you can get some value there. And the last guy I throw on the list is Zach LaVine, the skater boy. Interestingly, since he was named an All-Star, his numbers have dropped way off. 31 points per game. This is a guy averaging 43 fantasy points per game. It's a big dip. Why? He has not registered 1 single steal in the last 3 games. So this is a guy that averages over a steal per game. So you're talking 3 points per game off there. He hasn't blocked a single shot. That's 1.5. He's like a half a block game guy. That's another 1.5 points. So 4.5 points off there already because of a lack of defensive stats. He's averaging 2 fewer points per game. And weirdly, his rebound rate is half. So there are things there that make no sense. He's not going to go the rest of the season with no steals or blocks. He's not going to go averaging Colin Sexton's 2.7 rebounds per game. And the scoring probably jumps back up as well. So it might be harder to pull off, but there is an argument, and I wouldn't make the argument because people won't believe it if you tell it to them. But find the people who are big contract year person. People play for the contract. They only try hard for the contract, or they try hard for the accolade. And the tie-in between LaVine dropping off his performance and being named an All-Star, that person might have it in their head, man, he's taking his foot off the gas now that he's been named an All-Star. Is that all he was trying for? There will be people that think that. The nuance is trying to find who they are and get that thought process in their head without explicitly saying it. But the other thing you can do is, Markkanen will return. Porter will return. Shots, usage, that might all start to come down from LaVine. So while it's not an easy one to pull off, the recent production's been low, and there might be something there for you with Zach LaVine. These are just names. They're ideas, and there's rationale behind them. Pulling them off is much easier said than done. 100 times easier said than done. Trades that actually benefit your team are really tough to pull off, and that's why a lot of the time when I talk about trades in fantasy, the number one question you ask yourself is why? Are you doing it just because you want to make a trade? Or is it because it's legitimately benefiting you? And that's why I also always say that 10% of trades that are proposed should actually be done. Every trade you look at, your immediate reaction should be no. And then you look at it a little bit closer. But if you're just accepting over 50% of the trades that you're involved in, you're doing it wrong. So while these are options and you can try it, It's not going to happen the vast majority of the time. That's just how a smart person goes about trading, or you exploit the absolute dickhead in your league who doesn't know what they're doing, which I'm not sure there's a huge amount of fun in that. But being cautious, being judicious with the trades that you accept, the trades that you pull off, the trades that you offer is a really key part as well. Guys, subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. Sorry this one went a bit longer. Sorry for waffling. Sorry for talking so much shit, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.